Xeno Goku, one of the most requested characters I've had on this channel for a feats and analysis video. It's been long overdue, and it's time to share forth my knowledge on how strong this character truly is, regarding the cosmology, what he can destroy, and how consistent his feats are, and where would he concretely scale in the grand scheme of power scaling. This is Atari H&B, and this is How Strong is Xeno Goku? Now, who is Xeno Goku? Well, Xeno Goku is another way to say foreign Goku. He is Goku from the memories of Xeno Trunks, which is just another way to say foreign. These are foreign variants of the characters, as opposed to their original main timeline counterparts. As a result, Xeno Goku not only came from Trunks' memory, or as we know as Time Patroller Trunks, but he also trained with him, and was summoned specifically from Kronoa. Now, what makes Xeno Goku quite impressive is that he's not restricted as compared to his main timeline counterpart. And keep in mind, this Goku had experienced a plethora of things that has happened, including events from the movies, the original Dragon Ball, and even GT. The important significance means that we can actually include a lot of filler feats, and also include events from GT, which is canonical off of the filler, including statements from the original Dragon Ball anime, and the Daizenshu data books that speak on the movie events, including even statements that we recently obtained from Koyama. I think this as a result is going to help with the overall scaling and consistency levels. But don't let that slow you down. This also means the events from Fusion Reborn will play a big factor into how we scale this, along with some of the events that occurred in the game itself, Dragon Ball Xenoverse. And not only that, we're also going to be including some statements and events that also occur in Dokkan Battle. And yes, that will even include the Universal Studios movie, which as a result, this is going to show forth a lot, and I mean a lot of levels of power scaling that we're going to have throughout this video. So where do we begin? Well, let's start on the very basic level. Cosmology. Cosmology is very important for any type of power scaling. If you don't know the cosmology, then you can't express the order of magnitude on how powerful these characters truly are. On a second note, including the cosmology of Dragon Ball is very important, but there is a lot I need to correct on the cosmology about Dragon Ball. Outside of Chuck doing a really detailed video on the Dragon Ball cosmology, many other people either over highball it or underball it, if that makes any sense. With big popular channels such as Death Battle Screw Attack, as well as the Versus Battle Wikia, there's a lot of misinformation regarding the cosmology of Dragon Ball. I will attempt to explain it in the most detailed, accurate way I can without over highballing it or lowballing it, but give us a solid middle ground that I hope we can all agree on. The Living World. Okay, so before we get deep into what the Living World is, let's talk about what it isn't. It isn't finite. This is something fans come to the conclusion of specifically with popular channels, again like Death Battle or Versus Battle Wikia, asserting that everything is just typical universal level. This is because not only does Dragon Ball Super make claim that it has an edge and a center, but also because Daizenshu 4 claims that it is infinitely expanding on page 54, or on page 19 where it claims that it is infinitely expanding universe with Guru sitting there. I think the main issue is that people don't realize that there is such thing as an observable and a non-observed universe. This is of course easy to pick up with Daizenshu 7 and the same Daizenshu 4 as well. You see, you don't have to create a false dilemma to say it's one or the other, when in reality it could kind of be both. Koyama even supports the idea that the general universe is 4D, and I'll go into that in just a bit, exactly why it works. Garlic Jr.'s Dead Zone is also an extra dimension that I should mention, and to conclude all of that, to top it all off, let's just capitalize on the fact that all of this is simply just the surface level. You see, we haven't even spoken about Demon World or the Seguro space as well. but I believe this should be enough information to suffice as of now. The absolute living world for itself is a multi-dimensional or a low multiversal structure at the very basic core. Despite Dokkan Battle claiming it has additional spatial dimensions, possibly in the Garlic Jr. Dead Zone space, I believe it should at least stand as a solid fourth dimensional low multiversal structure. With that said, this is still just the beginning. What we have in store for you next is quite shocking. The afterlife. Oh boy. Okay, this one is going to be quite the controversy. This is where a lot of feathers are ruffled as well. Typically because a lot of people don't understand the aspect or concept of higher dimensions. And some people believe higher dimension doesn't automatically equal infinite transcendency. However, I'm going to correct that specifically right here, right now. Now, what is the significance? Well, in 1999, by the company of Fusions, Mike Pondsmith did have a published version of a Goku RPG adventure book that claimed that the afterlife transcends, well, the living world, and this includes the dimensions below it. However, if we go back about 4 to 5 years before that, in 1995 by Daisenshu 4, they actually already made that statement. The afterlife is the dimension that transcends dimensions invisible in the human world. So what does that mean? Well, we already discussed the living world is infinite, including additional spatial dimensions. But for the afterlife to transcend that means it must transcend space-time, right? And a lot of people on Versus Battle Wikia and Screw Attack Death Battle probably are not going to agree with that up front at first. Now, before diving into the big meaty part of this entire discussion here, we need to first understand that Toriyama himself considers the afterlife to be a separate dimension. So any argument you may see on Versus Battle Wikia arguing it's an additional 3A universe or any of the sort, they're completely and objectively wrong according to the author himself. Moreover, not just Toriyama's statement, but back as early as 1989, they consider it to be separated by space-time. So keep that in mind. It should also help that the 1999 data book RPG still claims that the afterlife is not only a higher dimension, but also a completely separate dimension. Daisenshu 4 and 7 follows up with that statement and keeps this a consistent notion. But that's not only them. Even Koyama accepts this. To give you a little bit of additional meaty detail, Koyama considers hell in Dragon Ball to be infinite, and including the fact that hell is also the fourth dimension. So I think that's very important to understand that there is some cosmological higher dimensionality going on within the afterlife. And remember, hell is just a portion of the afterlife, not the entirety of the afterlife. I don't like the logical fallacy that people use to say that three-dimensional beings go to the afterlife. Astral beings in most of Eastern culture have never been limited to only spatial structures or anomalies. An astral being can pretty much go wherever they float or want to be. Going to a higher dimension that can contain an infinite subset of the lower dimension doesn't automatically mean you can one-shot it. By that acknowledgement, that's like me saying, well, me and NASA was able to go above the Earth, so does that mean we can destroy the Earth? Not necessarily. Being able to go or access somewhere higher doesn't mean you can automatically destroy it. And for those who are still skeptical, yes, the staff was the original ones who requested for Toriyama to make that map. Moreover, I think I should include the fact that the afterlife transcending the lower dimensions means it transcends space-time, something Koyama even agreed with. But it's not just that. It's also the fact that he considers the afterlife, which transcends the 4D living world, as we stated, to be 5D? No, above 5D. Keep in mind, he said transcends, as in it's higher dimensions, which is plural. I mean, it adds up. Goku did claim the afterlife doesn't hold time normally, and the Supreme Kai considered the lower realm the temporal world, considering that he believes the Kaioshin realm and many others aren't necessarily affected by the axis of time that governs the lower living world. We're not going to even need to include the time room or the pendulum room in this factor, or even the time dimension known as the room of spirit and time. But this overall goes to support the main idea that if you axiomatically transcend an infinitely fourth dimensional sized universe, including other subset within it, which is already a low multiverse for the living world, then you would have to axiomatically be high universe plus. But it makes sense that you can even go further beyond, considering that there is believed to be an extra dimension that Goku raced in as well in the afterlife. And when you include the events from Fusion Reborn, statements from Shin Budokai, which can be a factor given we have all the game canons such as Xenoverse, Dragon Ball Fusions, Dokkan Battle, that all play a major role into the scaling of Xeno Goku, this particular cosmological scaling allows us to have a low complex multiversal afterlife. Now, when it comes to the entirety of the ensemble, the entire Universe 7 is infinitely larger than the macrocosm, or at least it's implied to be. We know this because of the black space background we get in Toyotaro's envision of Universe 10, implying that whatever else is in that background is likely infinitely bigger or just much larger to contain all of its existence. We also know that Koyama believes that Broly can't destroy the entire ensemble of the universe, but he definitely could destroy the macrocosm and the other lower infinities, including Hell, the universe, and much more. How does this work? Well, it must mean that it's a higher dimension that is beyond Broly's capacity. And since we know Broly is weaker than Hachiyak, at least in the canonical movie in special tellings, that means that the movie canonical version of, well, Cell is actually stronger than Broly and is universal as it was stated in the official manga, which may also scale to Frieza, who also transcended infinity in the Namek Saga variant, and Frieza being a threat to the universe and destroying a galaxy kinda casually. I think overall, a lot of the crazy high-end scaling is something we can accept for the main majority of Dragon Ball Xenoverse or Super Dragon Ball Heroes, and this overall just adds more to what Xeno Goku can do. But where do we go from here? The Neutral Zone in the Great Beyond. The Neutral Zone is infinitely bigger than the entire macrocosm, of course, but as a result, it's also infinitely bigger than the entire living world, which we established is at least 7th dimensional according to certain aspects. Keep in mind, Koyama never watched Dragon Ball Super, so I believe 7th dimensional, based on the collective pieces of information we have gathered, is an appropriate scale. Outside of an 8th dimensional neutral zone, the timeline itself is infinitely beyond even that, which means that the timeline should be 9th dimensional simply because of the nature of how a timeline axiomatically behaves. Remember, you're talking about the neutral zone, which holds an infinite amount of space and is infinitely larger and eclipses the 7th dimensional universes themselves. And for more evidence, you could see this image right here to support that. But the timeline contains every event from the dawn of time to the end of non-existent time, to eternity, pretty much. Basically like hypertime in DC, an infinite structure containing lower infinite subsets. Now picture this. Imagine all of those complex timelines, hyper complex timelines, all existing within Dragon Ball, that there's an infinite number of them that can be destroyed by a being named Demigod. That's right, Demigod on a almost casual level can destroy all of what I've just mentioned on an infinite level. Literally, and it's been stated and it can be done if you do fail. So where does he scale? Well, he scales even beyond that. He scales to the point where he goes outside of the Dragon Ball Heroes cosmology itself, to the point where he goes to what we can interpret as the 11th dimension, simply because the 11th dimension is Beat's world, which would just treat all of Dragon Ball Heroes as nothing more but just a mere plaything. And Demigod can transcend that and destroy not only Beat's world, but the timeline that contains Beat's world as the absolute ensemble, 12 dimensions. But if he really scales to that, must he be the most powerful? I mean, after all, he views Dragon Ball Heroes as mere fiction. And if you want to include the Universal Studios arguments, which we can, this all scales to a relatively almost outerversal level. But let's keep it a low ball. A low buck would tell us this is at least 12 dimensional. So a low hyperversal demigod would be a big threat, right? No, he's absolute trash. He actually gets bodied by Xeno Goku in base form. Yeah, he gets bodied by Xeno Goku in base form. Now, let's get real. Outside of course, Toa, the Dragon Ball Heroes version of Perpetua, I guess, and Fu, the Dragon Ball version of the Anti-Monitor, I guess, I don't know, whatever you want to call these guys, they're pretty much all at that level, if not much stronger. It took a Xeno Goku to go Super Saiyan 4 to even compete with Fu, and it didn't even stand a chance against him. At least, that was what we thought initially. Now, of course, this is where we get into some confusion. There's a statement claiming that the Beats world is technically not a higher dimension, though the same article that attempts to debunk it also still kind of concedes to the fact that Beats world still treats the lower as a video game. So even if you do claim that this was just an advertisement, it still is pretty much present that the lower world is a real game. It's a real game, as in it's still lower compared to them and still infinitely nothing, because they're of course existing in a higher realm. And although you may claim it is the future, it's hard to really dictate how they really mean that. I mean, they say it's a future, but it also isn't a future. I would like to say, in the words of Koyama, just please try to enjoy it for what it is, regardless of certain contradictions. It's clear that the preponderance of evidence of Beats' world more so fits in the favor of it being a higher dimension than it would be being just a future timeline, specifically because demigod destroying all infinity there would not have affected Beats' world in the grand scheme of things, so as a result, it still doesn't really count. You can't even call it a separate continuity of infinities as well, simply because all that tells us is that Beats' world still only has a singularity nexus, since we don't see any other copies of Beat. Of course, that is susceptible to change in the future. My last and final gripe is pretty much about how this article goes about the fifth dimension and how beings who are usually a higher dimension are depicted as, godly and beyond comprehension, like the living tribunal. But this is Dragon Ball, for crying out loud, and they don't have to do anything fancy for that. That's a logical fallacy and another attempt of a false dichotomy. A character can be depicted as being as dumb as a bat and still be infinitely stronger than somebody else regardless. I mean, look at Zeno. He's not dumb as a bat, but he definitely isn't all-knowing, and look how strong he is. Some beings don't even know how strong they are, and that's kind of an awesome trope they do in a lot of fictional storytelling. So to be a higher dimensional being, like for example, you're a 3D being and you don't even know how strong you are to a 2D being, you can't even comprehend the lower 2D world without lowering yourself to them or giving examples on writing. I mean, so for Beats' world to be in not a higher dimension doesn't really make any sense, especially when in Dragon Ball Xenoverse, they have a being from Beats' real world who is interpreted to be an extra dimensional being, still supporting the evidence that Beats' world is still a higher dimension. Rather, you want to consider it an outerversal metafictional transcendency or just an infinitely hierarchy transcending dimension. Regardless, Beats' world still sits at a solid hyperverse level, as I've stated in this video, and I'm going to stick with that argument, of course, until it is being changed by later on retcons or any other information we get in Super Dragon Ball Heroes. Now again, this shouldn't be any surprise to most people who've been paying attention to the most of the content on this channel. There have been a lot of down players. It's not just Screw Attack and Versus Battle Wikia, but people who've, well, let's say back in the past, used to tell me Dragon Ball doesn't have a multiverse, there's no one who's infinite multiversal in Dragon Ball, blah blah blah. Yeah, there are people all over the place, and I'm just going to give them the code name Light, because we'll just call him that for now. This person has been following me for a long time, trying to debunk some of the old RPG data books I've used, some of the Daizenshu statements I used, tried to use other arguments to counter, and then when Koyama starts claiming that everything I've been saying back in the day was true and holds a lot of weight, this person decides to start telling Koyama, stop answering these questions. Please don't answer questions you don't understand. And he's only saying that out of desperation because he knows that, well, Koyama's on our side. I remember back in the past, I used to make claims that I promise you, if any executive of Dragon Ball heard my explanation on how I break down the Dragon Ball's cosmology to be cohesive and coherent with the Daizenshu statements, they would all agree that it is definitely a higher dimension. Something Koyama agrees with and even retweets me saying, yeah, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I at least know that much. With that said, not only do we have people desperate enough to ask him not to answer questions because they're afraid of Dragon Ball characters being at a certain level, but it just goes to show that not only do we have a high complex multiversal canonical Goku, but we have a hyperversal Xeno Goku in base form. So with that said, I think that should be enough to conclude this video right there. The overall end result is that Xeno Goku is an extremely powerful variant of Goku and probably his most strongest incarnation to boot. Of course, this would mean outside of the Universal Studios feats, he would scale to a solid hyperversal being. And to be honest with you, depending on how you want to interpret the Universal Studios feats, could be true metafictional, to a point where it would be almost outerversal because he transcends beyond the comic itself, almost to the same degree as you have other beings transcend to the overvoid in DC when they go outside the white pages. Almost, of course. But outside of that, this is pretty much where I placed them at. And I think this is the most sensible way to look at the power scaling of Dragon Ball. Of course, you will still have people deny this and be very biased. They'll take claims of Yumineko transcending dimensions, even though it's more so, oh yeah, it's just a chessboard to me. Even though a chessboard, I can still take a chess piece, throw it at your head. You didn't infinitely transcend the game of chess. Chess is just a concept to you that you just play along with. And if human beings are a concept you play along with, cool. It's a chess game to you. But it's not the same as a game where you can edit and add in new installments, I suppose, or infinitely transcend. But, you know, for Dragon Ball, we even when we get blatant statements, we still can't get an upgrade. Regardless, this is the video. Goku, Xeno Goku, is hyperversal easily. And if you want to go any further, he would be definitely on the lines of the border between hyperversal and low outerversal, depending on how you want to look at it. Of course, you know how I feel about outerversal, so that's saying a lot. But this has been Atari H&B. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll be back with another one. And I'm signing off. Peace.